Now, there's some things in life that we don't like. I don't like that ice cream's fattening. Why is it that all the things that we love to eat are fattening and all the good things for us taste bad? Or for the most part. I hate it that weeds grow in the garden and some of them have stickers on them. Some of them have thorns. Some of them have roots that go deeper than the plants, but we'll just keep on weeding on. I hate that life is short. I love this place. I want to go to heaven. I don't want to go today. I want to stay here as long as I can, and that's the desire of everyone, so I'll just keep on living on, ready for the promised land. I hate that when mosquitoes bite you and ticks suck the blood out of you, that it's a great annoyance. I hate that there's a consequence to any action that I take. Sometimes if we do something bad, there's always a consequence to it. I hate that we bleed when we get cut. I hate to get cut. I hate that there's sickness around and we have to go through it. I hate that there's such a thing as a hospital and a funeral home. I hate that the weather gets so hot that it's unbearable to go outside and so cold that you freeze stiff in the wintertime. And there's some things in life we just don't like. But all in all, it's a pretty good life. The title of our lesson today is Be Sure of These Things. Be sure of these things. Now, we're not going to be looking at any verses today. If you would notice in your worship folder, we may look at it if time permits, a couple of things in Hebrews. But I just want to give you some things today in the way of a general discussion and answer some questions, and hopefully we'll have a little better understanding of some things. And you recall the last few weeks, last week we talked about certain kinds of Christians, and the last 3 weeks and then this week is about church attendance, more or less. And I want us to ask a question. Question number one, why do we come together on Sunday? Why is it necessary that we take an hour out of the week and come together? And we're going to try to answer that. The second question is, why not on the Sabbath? Why not on Saturday? It was listed in the Ten Commandments. This is when the Hebrews set aside a time to worship and could not do any work and a time of rest. Why not that? Well, to answer question number 2, and then we'll get to question number 2 in a little bit, the Israelites were under the law. The Ten Commandments commanded them, and by the way, do you remember, it is the 10 Commandments, not the 10 suggestions. You see, anything that God says in this book, He means it. Now we as preachers and Sunday school teachers and children's church workers, if we give forth the Word of God and people don't like it, don't get mad at me. I'm just a piano player. I just deliver the music that God has set forth. They were under the law, and this was given them as a commandment. The Hebrew word Sabbat, S-A-B-A-T, is rendered in our language the Sabbath. And it means to cease from labor and to rest. You see, God in 6 days created the earth and the heavens, and on the 7th day He rested. Not that He needed a rest, not that He even needed 6 days for creation, but He had a plan, you see. He had a plan that on day 1 He would do a certain thing. On day 2 He would do a certain thing. All the way for 6 days, so we would have Monday through Saturday and leave us Sunday. Now back then it was Sunday through Saturday, and Saturday was the day of worship, or the first day of their week. But it was a time of rest. And God rested on the Sabbath as an illustration to His children to set this time apart. You see, the Jews constantly labored to get to heaven. Every year they would have to go to the temple. Every Passover they would have to get together. Every feast day there was a certain thing that they had to do. They were constantly working. Not so under grace. Now we're under grace, and Jesus is our rest. Are you following me? The Jews had to enter into a rest as a commandment. We have entered into the rest of Jesus because He says, I have become your Sabbath day. And by the way, the only commandment that wasn't reinstituted in the New Testament was remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. All the other 9 were. Nowhere in the New Testament does it say remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Whole different thing. Has nothing to do with grace. Romans 14:5 says, one man regards one day above another, another regards every day alike. He that regardeth the day regards it for the Lord. Let them be convinced in his own mind. Thus, the Sabbath is no longer required because we don't have to set aside a time to rest. Now, here's where you may disagree with me. There is no day of the week in grace more holy than the other. But God said, come together and meet. And I believe that we're to do it on the first day of the week, which is Sunday. Okay? Come together, and I'm going to tell you why. The third question is, why do we come together at all? Why do we even bother with it? Why is it necessary? Number one, because it's God's will. Plain and simple. If that's all we had, that's all we need. Because it's God's will. Listen to what he said, Hebrews 10:25. Draw near, hold fast, and consider. Not forsaking. And that word forsaking, listen to me. Listen to me. That word forsaking means, and this means in a dramatic sense, do not abandon and leave, helpless and utterly forsake the assembling of ourselves together as the matter of some is. You following me? God said if you forsake the assembling of yourself together, you are utterly forsaking, you are leaving helpless, and you are abandoning my will. The church is, number one, a place for believers. It's a place where believers can love one another. 1 John 4:12. If we love one another, hey, listen. If we love one another, God dwells in us. And His love is perfected in us one toward another. The church is a place to encourage one another. Hebrews 3:13 says, but exhort one another daily while it is called today. You see, today is today, and there is never a tomorrow. We're always in today. Get that? There's always a yesterday because it's in the history books. There's never a tomorrow because when we step over into tomorrow, we're in today. And it says plainly exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. We need one another. We had church Thursday morning. Had a great service. And we were exhorted. And we were lifted up. We were encouraged on Thursday morning. Where? On Red Oak Road. Where else? On Red Oak Road. We were about halfway to the stop sign on Red Oak Road. The man from Joe Wheeler, I saw him turn in, and I saw him disappear behind the building. Now this was the man that turns off the meters when you don't pay your bill. And I thought, Debbie, Debbie, Debbie. But in fact, he parked over in the shade and ate his lunch, as we encourage them to do. We encourage people to come up here, the policemen. I talk to every one of them that ever comes through there, flag them down, say, please come up here and do your computer work. And they all say, this is where we come because this is central location. It's a good shade. It's good. You know, I want them here. I want the Joe Wheeler man here. I don't want him cutting off our power, but I want him here. And we were talking down there. I was working on the side of the road, and he just stopped right in the road and got out, walked around. Never seen him before. We struck up a conversation, and I was, of course, inquisitive about wanting to know about the meters. I said, well, do you turn off a lot of electricity because of people moving and going somewhere else, or because they don't pay their bill? And he just kind of shook his head, and he said, I've got 90 people in Lacey Springs that I just cut off their power. 90 people. He said, I'm going to Eva, and I'm going to cut off 90-something more because they didn't pay their bill. And he began to explain to me, and I said, yeah, I'll bet you every one of them's got a cell phone. Yeah. And I'll bet you, yeah. And I'll bet you everybody, and he said, I felt so sorry for one old man. Every month I go up there to cut his son's power off, and he comes out there and begs with me not to cut it off. And he said, I finally told him, I said, sir, if you'd get him to quit buying all this beer, he said, there was a barrel, always a barrel there full of crushed beer cans. Now we can afford this, but we can't afford power, you know. That's another thing. Brother Phil, should we not drink a beer? I don't care if you drink a barrel full of them. Just pay your electric bill. Pay your electric bill. That's what we were talking about, okay? It wasn't the fact, you know. And then, as I always do when I strike up a conversation with somebody, he began to talk about the things going on in the world, and I said, well, let me ask you something. What about eternity? He said, I took care of that many years ago. Listen, we began to have church right down there in the middle of the road. I mean, literally in the middle of the road. And we encouraged one another. It's a place to encourage one another every day. We got to be in church every day? No, but there's somewhere you can have church. Church is where two people are gathered together. Now, that verse over there, I've explained to you, that was to the Jews. That didn't mean the church, because people say, where two or three are gathered together in my name, that's not church. That's not church. But it is true where two people are gathered together. But where one person is gathered with himself can be church. Because we're church. We are church. But it's a whole lot better when you got two people. Church is a place to motivate one another to love and good works. Hebrews 10:24, let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in Christ and provoke them to good works. The church is a place to serve one another. Galatians 5:13, for brethren, you have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. The church is a place to instruct one another. Romans 5:14, and I myself also am persuaded of you, my brethren, that you also are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, able also to admonish or instruct one another. The church is a place to honor one another. Romans 12:10, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love in honor, preferring one another. Prefer the other person over yourself. The church is a place to be compassionate to one another. And be you kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. I think we need to stop right here just for a moment. My Bible tells me that if we have something against our brother, we're going to get it corrected. I've heard more sermons on this past week than any other subject, I believe. I heard two last night. Heard three last night. Two messages and one radio or one TV program talking about it. And they were plainly saying that if we hold a grudge in our heart, we're wrong, we're sinning, we're going against God's will, and there is nothing that can't be forgiven. You know why? Because Christ gave us an example. He said, I will forgive anyone of anything. Wow. He hung upon that cross that day. He said, no sin is too black. No work of hatefulness is too hateful that I can't forgive. How bad was the sin that day on the cross? It was so bad that the sun went behind the clouds and God turned his back and he couldn't look at it. And yet Jesus said, pour it on me, whatever your sin is. And he being made just a little lower than the angels, found himself to be obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And he took upon himself the form of a man because of you and me. Church is a place to be compassionate to one another and be kind to each other. Tender-hearted. Now there's a difference in being kind to somebody and being tender-hearted. I see tender-heartedness out here. I saw tender-heartedness this morning. It wasn't just compassion. Compassion and tender-heartedness and obligation, and these things are different. You see, we have a duty to do certain things. Your duty as a mother and father has always been to take care of your children when they couldn't provide for themselves. That's your duty. It's your duty, mother and father, to make that child a peanut butter sandwich. It's compassion when you put some jelly on it. That's compassion because you love them so much. And that's what Jesus did for us. He not only gave us a peanut butter sandwich on the cross, but He put a bunch of Smucker's strawberry jam on top of it. And He said, if I can do that, why can't you do this for your church family? And not only your church family, but all of creation. You see, He doesn't stop there. Our God is a good God. Our God's a loving God. Our God is long-suffering, but there comes a point that God says, I've had enough. There are church, and I have this feeling, I don't know what it is. Sometimes pastors can sense something, and there's something going on somewhere. And I believe that God has said, I've about had enough. I'm not going to take it anymore. But I feel God wouldn't do that. God wouldn't do that to His children. And I've told you over and over and over, He did it to me. And I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful. I still bear the scars. I still bear the grave sites. But I'm so thankful because He's brought us to where we are today. I'm so fearful. I'm so fearful that there are some people that are not examining themselves and seeing whether or not they're in the faith, number one. And number two, they have forgotten about this thing of forsaking God's people. I think we as preachers make the mistake of saying we're forsaking God's house. Yeah, we are, by forsaking people. Come into God's house. Come into this place. I pray every week. I walk down this aisle. I pray that God will bless this place. I lay my hands upon every pew. I pray for everyone in this pew. I pray that God's holiness will be over this place. I pray that the people that drive down that road will look at this church and say, this is a place of holiness. This is a place where you can find God. This is a place where they love me. Listen, folks, all it takes is just a little spoonful of jelly. That's what I'm telling you today. That's what this is all about. Folks, you know what the Bible says. We're all body parts. One's the hand, one's the foot, one's the head, one's the ear, one's the leg, one's the elbow, one's that little part of your ear right there. And we can do without that earlobe, and we can do without a foot, we can do without a hand. Shoot, I saw a guy, you ought to look him up on the internet. He has no feet, no arms. He calls it his flipper. He will, if he were here today preaching, he'd be sitting right up here walking back and forth. No legs, just walking back and forth. He drives a motorboat. A tiller. It's got the tiller handle on it. He dives off the high dive and swims out, and he does everything. But I bet you he wished he had a couple of feet, a couple of legs, maybe a couple of arms, just one arm maybe. I think of the people that are, the people that are incomplete. We can survive. He can survive up here, and he goes around, preaches to everybody. But he's incomplete. Now, folks, our church will survive with a hand cut off every now and then, and maybe a finger off the other hand, and maybe a foot and a leg. But our church is not complete without everybody. That's why it's so important that we be in our place. And all of you that are watching by way of video, this is for you. The body just can't function properly with parts missing. And we've gone way over today, but I'm going to keep on going. I believe this is so important. Hebrews chapter 3 says this. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 7. If you want to look along, it's not necessarily. Wherefore, as the Holy Ghost saith, today, if you will hear His voice, harden not your hearts as in the rebellion in the day of trial in the wilderness. This is what we read over in Psalm. When your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Wherefore I was angry with that generation and said, they do always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. This is that loving God we serve. He said, I love them so much. I told them what to do, and they didn't do it. They've made me angry for 40 years. Now they're going to enter into my wrath. And they will not enter into my rest. Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily, while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we are made partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast unto the end. While it is said, today if you will hear his voice, harden not your heart, as in the provocation, or as in the time of the rebellion of the Israelites. For some, when they had heard, did rebel, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses, but with whom was he grieved 40 years? Was it not with them that had sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness, and to whom sware he that they should not enter into his rest, but to them that believe not? So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Let us therefore fear, lest the promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. For unto us was the gospel preached as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. You see, the Israelites had the same, he said, had the same thing preached to them that we have today. For we which have believed do enter into rest. We which have believed do enter into rest. Now this is our message today. This is our message today. Be sure of these things. Be sure of these. Number one, be sure of your rest. Are you saved? Have you been saved? Has there been a time in your life, a specific moment, not a gradual thing over or a progression over days, weeks, months, and years, but there has to come a certain time in your life that you say, Lord, I know I'm a sinner. I receive you. I thirst. I want your Son. Be sure of your rest. He said, for we which have believed do enter into rest. If they not enter into my rest, be sure of these. Be sure of your rest. Be sure of your reverence. As we come into this place on Sunday morning, we bring we'll cut up in here and we'll act like kids, and we'll have some kids run in the aisle, but when it comes time, when the rubber hits the road, we're going to reverence this time together. Be sure of your rest. Be sure of your reverence. And lastly, be sure of your rewards. What's that got to do with anything? All these things that I laid out before you, all of these things lead to those rewards in the promised land. And so much more it is that we need to do than what I've laid out before you today. So much more. So many more people that we need to see. So many more people that needs to be here. So much work needs to be done in this community. Not only in this community, but as far as we can reach people. I do not believe in mission trips anymore. We have people that will gather up a group of people and go to Venezuela. They will go to Belize. They will go to some other, usually it's a vacation place, and take the gospel. They won't walk across the street to invite their neighbor to church or tell them how to be saved. So I no longer believe in mission trips out of the church unless they've reached their community and they are concerned with getting the gospel where the gospel's never gone. Now this is an indictment upon the church today. That we seek after foolish things before we do the work that's before us. Now we're about to enter into this communion time. This concludes our service other than the communion.